Thank you very much, Andre. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about the impact that artificial intelligence is having on firms and industries. And can everybody see my screen in a full screen mode?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So in this project, we're interested in understanding the impact that technology has on the growth of individual firms and on the industrial concentration. We focus on a specific technology which has been advertised as potentially having very disruptive effects, artificial intelligence. What we have seen is that in the last decade, there has been an explosion of investment in AI. Private firms in the US are putting tens of billions of dollars into investments in artificial intelligence, and governments all over the world, including the US, Europe, and China, are pushing for more investment and more research in AI. But it is still an empirical question of whether AI is actually having the impact that we may anticipate on individual firms, and then how that flows into industries. On the one hand, AI is advertised as having the potential to really transform production, potentially replace labor, so we may anticipate large effects of AI in individual firms. On the other hand, in the last few decades, we've seen a slowdown of productivity growth in the US, which raises the question of whether technologies such as artificial intelligence may be overhyped and may not have the effects that are advertised. And there are a few potential conceptual channels through which AI may impact firm production and induce firm growth. First is productivity. AI is aimed at, some uses of AI are aimed at improving forecasts and automating tasks such as anomaly detection, which may make the production processes of the firms more efficient and lead to productivity growth. At the same time, some of the use cases for AI that have been most implemented so far are things like targeting advertisements, tailoring products, and learning from consumer behavior, which can potentially allow firms to price discriminate and gain market power. That's the second channel. The third possible way in which artificial intelligence may be impacting individual firms and broader industries is by having scale advantages. Specifically, successful implementation of AI algorithms relies pretty heavily on having the data to do so. So having large, well-curated data sets make it more feasible for a firm to use AI methods. And large, well-curated data sets are more likely to be something that large, well-established firms with broad operations may have than firms that are small and relatively kind of narrowly focused. So it's possible that artificial intelligence does benefit firms, but it benefits firms unevenly, where firms that are already large are reaping more of the benefits than firms that are relatively small. And in this project, we're interested in understanding the kind of comprehensive picture of the impact of using AI technologies in operations on firms and industries. We first want to see which firms are even investing in AI, and then measure the impact of those investments on the growth of individual firms, how that aggregates up to the industry level, and lastly, which firms are the ones that are benefiting relatively more, and how does that shape concentration of a given industry. And we bring three key ingredients that enable us to look at these questions. The first is our data. We're combining, sorry, there's a little bit of a connection lag. So hopefully my slides are well aligned with where I'm currently speaking. So we bring in three key ingredients. The first is our data. We combine detailed firm level information on the demand for AI talent from job postings with the actual hiring of AI talent from resumes, which allows us to measure at the firm level. The human capital angle for measuring AI investments is especially well suited because implementing artificial intelligence algorithms relies really heavily on having the human capital to do so, and is less reliant on physical capital investment than some of the prior technologies, for example, robotics. And the second key ingredient to our approach is our measure. So instead of pre-specifying specifically which terms we define as being AI related, we leverage the full data set of job postings to empirically determine which skills are co-occurring with the core AI terms, such as artificial intelligence or machine learning. And from that, learn the AI-related skills and keywords to classify the individual employees and thus the firm-level AI investments. The third key ingredient to our approach is identification. We do want to speak to the causal impact of artificial intelligence on individual firms and industries. So we instrument the firm-level AI investments with two separate instruments. The first one is an industry-level measure of AI investments by firms in Europe. So for a given firm in the US, we'll look at all of the firms in the same industry that are domiciled in Europe and look at the European employees of those firms and to what extent are they skilled in AI as an instrument for the specific US firms' AI investments. Here is that investments by firms in US and Europe are going to be driven by similar kind of enabling factors like data availability or technological advancements in computing, but that European AI investments are going to be independent of the specific demand shocks to the US firms. So if a specific US firm is on already a higher growth trajectory, that will be stripped away by instrumenting with the European investment rates. And we do a number of checks to ensure that, that these conditions appear to be met. The second instrument is much more local. So now instead of using variation in Europe, we're actually looking specifically at where the firm is based in the US and constructing a shift share instrument that looks at the differences in the local exposure to AI from the industries that are co-located with the specific firm. So for a given firm, we look at the industrial composition of firms that are headquartered in that same commuting zone, and then taking a weighted average of the AI investments across those industries. So the idea here is that if financial firms in New York City are bringing in a lot of AI talent, then that increases the potential for AI investment also for non-financial firms in New York City by making AI talent more broadly available in the area. And before I go into the details, I'm going to I'll skip the kind of the broader literature. Basically, we're speaking to the impact of artificial intelligence and big data. Most of that literature focuses on the labor market's effects, versus we're looking at the effect on the firms, and we're bringing in a very broad measure of AI investments. So to the extent that the prior literature has looked at the impact of AI in firms, a lot of it is based on things like AI patents, which is really for the firms that are innovating in AI, rather than firms that are just bringing in AI into their operations. So, so we really kind of get at the latter. We're also contribute to the macro literature on the causes and consequences of increased concentration that has been observed in the last few decades, where our results are pointing to new technologies being a potential driver of the rising concentration. So maybe I'll stop here for questions before I go into the summary of the results. And
right, we have a couple of questions already. So are you going to look at acquisitions by firms, for example, Google buying small artificial intelligence intensive firms?
So we do not specifically look at acquisitions, but to the extent that that acquisition involves any transfer of human capital, we would document it in our measure. So Google acquires an AI firm that has AI employees who then basically their employer becomes Google on their resume, and then we will see that in the kind of measure of the percentage of employees who are AI related.
Okay, how is your identification not just a bag of words in disguise? After reading the description, it still seems to rely on AI keywords.
Yeah, so it does. Is that we do not pre-specify the keywords from the beginning. So I'll get at the methodology, but we basically look at for each skill in the data, there are tens of thousands of skills. We look at, does that skill closely co-occur with one of just 4 kind of basically areas of AI: artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing, and then assign each skill out of all of the skills, continuous measure of how closely related it is, and that kind of informs which keywords we then use to search in the resume data.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, the slides are walking away from me. Yeah, so what we find is that artificial intelligence is associated with kind of growth at the firm level. We're seeing that larger firms are more likely to invest in AI and then can grow more. So at the firm level, we see that investments in AI are associated with growth in sales, growth in employment, and growth in market share. But interestingly, we're not observing any effect on either productivity or markups. So the firms are able to increase their scope, but they're not increasing, say, the sales per worker. They're increasing sales, they're increasing workers, and then the relative kind of sales per worker are staying roughly the same. We're also seeing that the positive effects of AI are stronger in the subsample of firms that are already larger and more productive to begin with. So at the industry level, what this means is that AI is associated with increases in sales and employment for the industry as a whole, but also increases in industry concentration. So overall, our results are painting the picture of AI being a driver of the expansion of the firms that are ex ante most efficient, and then contributing to the relative rise in the market share accruing to those superstar firms.
Anastassia, here's a good time to ask another question. So could you explain a bit more why the effects of AI in firm growth should be different from the effects of other technology, for example, automation in manufacturing?
Yeah, so some of the aspects of AI are pointing towards possibly conceptually different questions, right? So I think that the first channel, kind of the productivity growth, is something that we would expect from technology more broadly. So we would expect but possibly more efficient processes from either automation or from AI. But some of the other channels are maybe more kind of AI specific. So something like the potential for market power increases, I think, are even stronger for AI, given that a lot of the uses that have been kind of explored so far and things like advertising and product tailoring, which has the potential to increase price discrimination. Now, we're not finding evidence of that, but conceptually, I think there was more reason to possibly expect it. And then the last kind of conceptual channel, the scale advantages, are also something that arises from some of the features of AI, which is going to be its dependence on data, as well as it being a general purpose technology. So actually the specific types of expansion that we're documenting in this paper, I think are more aligned with AI than with some of the previous technologies. In particular, we're seeing that the AI investing firms, as they're growing their sales, employment, and so on, are also growing their kind of spread. So they're growing the number of geographic regions in which they operate, and they're growing their product offerings, proxied by kind of the number and the percentage of employees who are product managers. So this is something that aligns well with the conceptual features of AI, right? When firms invest in AI, they actually do so across a broad cross-section of their operations, and they do so in new operations as well, versus previous technologies like automation in the manufacturing center. They're pretty specific to the product that you're producing. So I think that that kind of overall, this scale advantages channel that we're observing is something that is more closely linked to AI than some of the prior technologies. I don't know what it is with my connection, but the slides keep moving at a different rate than I think they will. But I think I'm now firmly in the data slide. All right, so as I mentioned, we bring together, okay, I guess not, two key data sets. The first is a data set of job postings from a provider called Burning Glass Technologies, which includes 180 million individual job postings with comprehensive coverage of online job openings in the US in 2007, and then consistently from 2010 onwards. This provider basically collects all job openings that they can find that are available online. I think prior papers that have used this data set and that validated it across kind of the full cross-section of job openings have found that it captures pretty much almost all of the online job postings and about 60 to 70% of all job postings, period, including offline. So it is a very comprehensive data set of the firm's demand for various workers and skills. Now, the really kind of convenient feature of this data for our project is that it comes with a detailed taxonomy of required skills labeled for each of the job postings. So in each job posting, the company Burning Glass extracts, these are the skills that are required for that job. And that allows us to see which of the jobs are AI related versus not, first by identifying the skills that are AI related, and then by aggregating that up to the job posting level. The second data set in the project is from a company called Cognizant. One of our co-authors is the chief science officer of Cognizant, so that's kind of where we get our access. And this is basically a very large data set of employment profiles or resumes. Includes hundreds of millions of individual profiles, global coverage. So we have very good coverage of employees in the US. We also have actually quite decent coverage of employees abroad, especially in Europe, which allows us to build that kind of Europe-based instrument. And for each employee in the sample, we get the full job history, so where they're working now and in the past, their education records, as well as anything else that the person thinks is relevant to put on their resume or profile, such as their skills and any publications or patents or awards, certifications, and so on that they may have obtained or produced throughout their career. The neat thing about this, one of the neat elements of this data set is that it allows us to see the actual hiring rather than just demand for AI talent. So a potential concern with the Burning Glass job postings data is that it tells us that the firm wants to hire for AI, but it does not necessarily tell us that the firm is able to hire for AI. So we're going to cross-validate this demand for AI jobs with the actual AI employees in the resumes, and encouragingly, the measures of AI investments from these two data sets, from the job postings and resumes, are highly correlated, and they yield very consistent results throughout. So in the paper, we do all analyses on both of the data sets, and the first panel on resumes and the second on job postings. In the interest of space, today I will show you just the resume-based results, but the results with the job postings are very consistent, which is encouraging, given that the job postings data is more widely available. So measures constructed from job postings data are similar to what would be constructed with the resume data. There are any questions on the data part?
Okay, there are quite a few questions. Let's see whether they're all related to the data. So
I'll take others too.
Yeah, so if some of them are, you would like to answer later, you can of course defer this until later point. So, all right. So, does your analysis focus mainly on non-financial firms as banks, artificial intelligence investments? AI investments may depend on the competition they face from the fintech platforms.
Yeah, so our analysis throughout the paper looks at all firms, except actually what we are excluding is like potential AI producers, so excluding basically IT firms, because we want to get at the impact of AI, of using AI in the firm rather than the impact of innovating in AI or solutions. We do also slice the sample by broad industry. So we look separately at finance, manufacturing, services, and then everything else. And encouragingly, the results are very similar across there. So we're seeing actually, once I get there, I may show that table. I don't kind of remember exactly off the top of my head, but I think finance and services are pretty much identical in terms of the coefficient estimates.
Okay, can you tell from the data how AI is used within a firm? on, for example, on data on occupation. The mechanism could be different if AI is used in different ways, including hiring process, product optimization, performance monitoring, predicting sales target, and so on.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we don't focus on it in the analysis of the paper. We just look at the broad firm level. But what we did do, because we wanted to really make sure that we understand kind of what our measure is capturing and what is going on in the firms, is that we conducted a number of case studies in great detail about specific firms. We include 4 of them from kind of broad different industry segments to get the full landscape across in the appendix of the paper. And what we're seeing is it's pretty intuitive. So typically, when a firm is investing in AI, it gets used across the board. So you would see kind of in finance, you would see risk management, as well as algorithmic trading platforms. In kind of in a firm like Caterpillar, which is a construction firm, you would see it being used to kind of fleet sort of monitoring and optimization. You use it for like part recognition. There's a computer vision part recognition. You basically see kind of across the entire landscape of what the operations of that firm are. You also, or what is interesting, that we also observe kind of new products being facilitated by AI. So United Health, which is a kind of insurance firm, uses AI sort of in its kind of main arm, as well as then the founding a completely new arm called Optum, which is much more AI and data centered, which provides kind of things like prescription recommendations for doctors, or helping manage care for kind of large organizations, and that is really data driven. So overall, our impression is that once a firm starts investing in AI, it does so across many different fronts within the firm, and interestingly also in fronts that were previously not there at the firm, previously not feasible.
Okay, how do you deal with the boilerplate resumes, job postings? Are resumes updated annually, or how do we check?
Are the resumes updated, or?
Boilerplate resumes, job postings, basically. How do you deal with those?
Yeah, so for the resumes, not sure if there's kind of boilerplate, but the resumes that are missing a lot of things. So if we're not able to see somebody's employment, that we don't classify them at all. If we do not see the specifics, I believe, so that we would just not classify them as an AI worker, so maybe kind of under reporting the AI employees. For the job postings, I think that there's still information that gets extracted based on, say, like the firm description and basically anything else that the provider may be able to collect when they're scraping. I think they use basically as much as they can to infer what skills may be required if there are no required skills listed. But to the extent that that's not feasible, that there's just no information at all, then I think they will not be classified with any required skills, and so will not be included in our analysis.
Okay, a few more questions. As cloud computing is becoming more efficient, aren't smaller firms more likely to delegate AI to such providers without establishing AI divisions within their own firms? Would you be concerned how this affects your results?
Yeah, so that is an excellent question, and something that we've thought about a lot, because of course we don't have data on purchasing AI solutions from external sources, right? We have this really nice data on the human capital of the firms. We don't really see what they're investing in terms of buying AI solutions from others. What we do see encouragingly from the case studies that we have done is that it tends to go hand in hand. So when a firm is bringing in or trying to bring in consultants or external solutions, there's usually at least some AI hiring activity that goes on inside the firm as well, to be able to use those solutions or collaborate with consultants. So as an example, GlaxoSmithKline, a pharmaceutical firm, they actually their AI investments picked up on our human capital measure when they brought in somebody from a consultant who would help them figure out how to use the IBM Watson platform for their drug discovery efforts. But we saw the hiring of that person, right? So we saw kind of the onboarding of the person who was going to help them use Watson. And then we saw AI hiring more generally pick up at the firm from that point onwards. And that's something that, that we think is ubiquitous, that those two are complements. So when you're bringing in external solutions, you're also hiring internally. Now, you would not be hiring internally potentially to the same extent as if you were building everything in-house, but we think we are picking that up. Of course, we don't really have the data on external purchases to be able to verify that in the broader sample.
Okay. All right. Can your results speak to whether and where there is over versus under investment in AI?
I don't think so, given that we only look at the firm wide level. We're not kind of differentiating between the different use cases, except in the case studies that we do. In terms of whether it's efficient, I think that that depends a lot on kind of the extent of the frictions, right, that may be there. So our results are pointing to AI having a positive effect. So the firms are growing more when they invest in AI. They're not increasing their kind of efficiency measures like sales per worker, but they are able to sell more while increasing the workforce proportionally. So I think if you can operate a larger operation at the same productivity level, then that's already a positive effect. That does raise the question, right, of, well, the firms that are not investing in AI, why are they not doing it? And kind of what are the frictions potentially prevented? And likely would be things like those that are driving, right, our IV variations, availability of data or computing power at the sort of sub-industry level, or availability of AI talent, right, in the geographic kind of regions where the firm is based. But we don't calibrate in terms of, can we see the frictions that would be enough to
okay, let's take one more question at this point and then move on. So how do you control for other components of capital expenditures and employment expenditures that might be correlated with AI expenditures but might be driving the results?
Yeah, so we do control for a number of both like firm and kind of the regional variations. So when I show you the results in terms of what at the firm level is predicting AI investments, we include all those controls when we then estimate the effect of AI investments, such as kind of the available cash or starting size, markups, R&D, as well as then the commuting zone level, things like the percentage of workers that are high skilled, of various demographics and so on, as that may enable the availability of AI talent in the region. We also, importantly, in one of the test control for other technologies, so we repeat all of our methodology to pick up investments in robotics and IT, and they include both of those as controls, and we find that the effects, the estimated coefficients on the AI investments do not change at all from inclusion of those other technologies. So we do think that we're picking up something that is specific to AI.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so let me briefly go over the way that we measure AI investments by firms. So as I mentioned, our goal here is not so much to avoid using keywords as to avoid having to subjectively say which keywords we think are AI related. So all that that we do is we seed the kind of the really broad AI concepts: artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, and computer vision. And then we'll look at every other skill in the data, which I think there's maybe around the order of 20,000. And we take a look at whether the jobs that are requiring that specific skill S also require one of these four core AI skills. So as an example, deep learning is a highly AI-related skill, because out of all of the job postings that list deep learning as a required skill, 86% of them will also have one of AI, machine learning, NLP, or computer vision. Information retrieval, on the other hand, would be something middling. So just under 40% of the skills that list information, of the jobs that list information retrieval, would also list AI, machine learning, NLP, or computer vision. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum from deep learning is communication skills. So they're out of all of the job postings that have communication skills as a required skill, and of course, there are many. Some of them also might list AI, machine learning, NLP, or computer vision, but the vast majority of them do not. So communication skills, empirically, is not a skill that co-occurs a lot with AI. So this gives us a continuous measure for each skill in the data, and then we can aggregate that out to the job posting level. So now we look at each job posting and all of the skills that are required in that job posting and average the measure across the skills and see, okay, well, this job postings mostly on the skills that are listed are these really high AI related skills or not, and give us a job posting level measure, which then we can aggregate up to the firm level. When we look at the resume data is very rich, but of course there's a lot of heterogeneity. So not everybody lists skills on their resume. Skills on resumes are also not time invariant. So skills for the job postings are linked to every specific job posting versus skills in somebody's resume. You don't know which exact job they were applying that skill at. So what we do in the resume data is we take the skills that were identified as most AI related from the job postings data. So skills like deep learning. And then we search for those skills in the fields of the resume that we can link to a specific job. So we look at the job title and job description, as well as any patents, publications, and awards that the employee has produced during that job. So a few examples here. Slides, yeah. There we go. So if somebody's job title is senior machine learning developer, right? Then we find the term machine learning right in their job title. That's an AI employee. If somebody's job description includes them using things like deep learning models, that's an AI employee. Or if somebody publishes a paper on neural networks during a specific job, then we classify them as an AI employee at that job at that time. This allows us to now have a resume-based measure for each firm in each year by looking at the percentage of the employees at that firm that were classified as being AI employees. And we match employers, match firms to CompuStat and construct this panel of each firm's AI investments in each year. And what we see over time is, of course, that the share of AI employees is rising quite a bit from the beginning of the sample, 2007, then burning glass doesn't have data in 2008 and 9, so we actually started sample in 2010, but as you can see, not much action happens between 2007 and 2010, and then it really begins to pick up around 2012 and grows through 2018, which is the end of our sample. From beginning of the sample, 2007, 2010, 2018, we see about a 6-fold increase in the percentage of employees that we classify as AI related. And this increase is quite ubiquitous across industry sectors. So we see, of course, a higher share of AI employees in the information sector, but the increase in AI employees is very similar across the different industry sectors. Some sectors start out lower, they end lower, but they also see that approximately 5-6-fold increase in the share of AI workers. So it is a broadly applicable phenomenon in terms of the increase. Are there any questions at this point before I start going into the analysis?
Not now, but they will be coming soon, I'm sure.
I'm sure. All right, so we're going to start by just taking a look at what kind of predicts AI investments at the firm level. And here we look at the change in the share of AI workers from 2010 to 2018. And we relate that to firm characteristics at the start of that sample period in 2010. And we see that larger firms, so firms with higher sales, more market share, more employment, are more likely to increase their AI investments by more. We also see that firms that have more cash see a large increase in AI workers, as well as firms that start out with higher markups. What we're mostly interested in is seeing what happens to those firms as they invest in AI. So we're looking at the time series of AI investments from 2010 to 2018. And we're looking at the changes in firm variables like log sales or employment over that same time horizon. The reason that we use this long differences specification rather than looking at, say, like the by year effects of AI investments on firm growth is that AI investments tend to be very smooth across the firm. So we don't see kind of a specific year where the investment happens. Once a firm starts growing its AI workforce, that tends to continue pretty smoothly. We see that in the individual firms that we look at in the case studies. And also the effects of the AI investments do not materialize that quickly. So they're also kind of a long horizon type of technology. So our main specification looks at these effects over the 8-year period, and I'll show you a little bit of an event study afterwards. And we employ two kind of IV strategies to try to get at the causal impact of AI investments on firms. The first instrument is similar to what has been done to identify the causal impact of robotics and import competition, which is looking at the industry level growth in AI investments by firms in Europe. So for each firm in the US, we look at the European firms that are classified into the same 5-digit mix level industry, and we use the relatively comprehensive coverage of the Cognizant resume data in Europe to measure the growth in the share of AI workers by those same industry European firms. The reason that we focus on Europe is first, Cognizant has more kind of consistent coverage of Europe than other geographic regions. Second is when we look to the extent that we do have coverage of different geographic regions, if we look at the growth in AI investments, Europe looks most similar to the US, has the highest kind of AI growth, and we're not able to capture as much of the growth in other regions, or maybe there isn't. And Europe is a developed economy, so it has probably pretty similar technological frictions as the US. So the type of availability of data or computing power that would be available to the US firm is probably similar to the firms in the same industry in Europe. And so the identifying assumption here is that the growth in AI employees in US and Europe is driven by similar technological factors, such as data availability. Those vary across industries, but the growth of AI share by European firms is not related to things like the growth trajectory of the particular US firm or kind of industry level demand shocks. So we take a look at the pre-trends in the outcome variables, so growth in sales, employment, market share. For US firms, we don't see any pre-trends before we start measuring the AI investments with the European instrument 2010. We also take a look at whether our instruments, so the European firms' AI investments between 2010 2018 are positively correlated with kind of indicators of demand for the same industry in the US. We look at the producer price index and changes of that over the same time horizon, and we see actually a very weak but slightly negative relationship. So it doesn't appear to be the case that we are capturing the growth trajectories or demand shocks to the US firms. However, no instrument is perfect. So what we do is we actually use two instruments that are based on kind of different intuition and different data to confirm that our results are very consistent across the two. Our second instrument is a Bardic style instrument that looks at each firm's local kind of composition of industries around that firm, and then the AI investment rates by those co-located industries, and use that to instrument specific firms' AI investments. The idea here is that if a firm is located in a location where a lot of the industries are investing in AI, then there'll be more AI talent in the region, and so greater potential for that firm to be able to hire AI employees as well.
Anastassia, the share of artificial intelligence workers seem to be fairly small. Do you think your results suggest that these workers have much larger contribution to the firm growth than other workers? Are these workers complements or substitutes in general? And for example, do firms tend to replace non-AI workers with AI workers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it is true that it's a very small share of employment. But what we're seeing is that it appears to be a complement. So what we're seeing is that there is growth in employment overall that's quite sizable when the firms are investing in AI. And more specifically, when we take a look at the product managers as a employees, those are growing. So there are, I think, specific types of workers that are maybe especially complementary to these AI investments, because the AI investments appear to be used to kind of increase the scope of operations, which both increases the overall workforce as well as workers that are specific to, say, product development or product management, if the firm is increasing its product offerings.
Okay, thank you.
That's actually the next slide. These are the results in OLS. So we're seeing that the increase in the share of AI workers is associated with growth in sales and actually pretty comparable growth in employment. So both sales and employment are increasing basically hand in hand. So the firm is growing, but the firm is actually hiring more as well as increases in market share, though that is less precisely estimated. Here, the same tests now done with the two instruments. So the panel above is looking at the foreign industry IV, and the panel below is looking at the shift share IV. We don't look at market share with the foreign industry IV, since that instrument looks at the industry level. But we see very consistent results across those two instruments, and that are also consistent with the OLS results. The coefficient estimates are a little bigger in the IV framework than the OLS framework, which may indicate that the firms that are investing in AI are actually doing so concurrently with having maybe fewer other investment opportunities, or it may just reflect the measurement error in the OLS estimates. I don't think there's statistically different across OLS and IV, and importantly across the two instruments, which were constructed from very different ideas and very different data sets, we see really similar results. So the coefficient estimates for both impact on sales and employment are very similar across the foreign industry and shift share. I mentioned that we also do try to take a look a little bit at the timing of these effects, which is challenging because there is no kind of distinct point at which each firm just hires a lot of AI workers. They tend to hire year after year, and you see kind of a smooth growth in AI employees once a firm starts hiring AI employees. So instead of doing a traditional case study, we estimated distributed lead lag model, where we basically regress kind of the sales of the firm on sort of the AI worker share of AI workers from up to 5 years prior and up to 2 years actually ahead. So that also allows us to take a look at the pre-trends. So the year 0 is right around here. We don't see any kind of differences in terms of the sales and employment of those firms prior to each kind of year of measuring the AI investments. We do see the effects in the future. Interestingly, even in year 1, we're actually still not seeing any relationship between sort of lagged AI workers and future sales. It starts to pick up around kind of years 2 to 3. So consistent with our notion that those investments can take a little bit of time for us to actually start seeing the impact on the firm's sides. Aggregating that up to the industry level is something that is ex ante, could go either way. For technologies such as robotics, there has been evidence that at the firm level, bringing that technology is increasing employment, but at the industry level, there are negative spillovers, and so the employment actually goes down. So for AI, we're not seeing the negative spillovers dominate. If anything, we see that at the industry level, an increase in the share of AI workers is also associated with more sales and growth in employment that is pretty comparable to the firm level.
The question is this increase in concentration likely to be temporary or permanent?
That is a great question, to which I don't know the answer. So we kind of conceptually, we think that our results line up most closely with theoretical models that consider kind of certain types of technological change, in our case AI, as lowering the overhead costs of spanning multiple markets, which then allows the firms that have kind of the most, that are most productive and most efficient per market to enter more market and kind of capture more market share. How that might play out in the long term, I think may depend on the evolution of the technology as well, right? So if AI is dependent on having the well-curated data to be able to expand and to implement those methods, and that's something that naturally favors the ex-ante larger firms. That right now, I don't see that changing, but if there kind of in the future there are changes in terms of where the firms obtain the data, or how publicly available the data becomes, and so on, right? Then we can see that that altering. But I think at this stage, it's still very early on to be able to speak to the evolving dynamics.
Do you have information on how AI contributes to growth? Is it through price competition?
Yeah, so I'm gonna get a little bit of the mechanisms, and interestingly, we don't see any changes in the markups that the firms that are investing in AI are charging. So we currently don't see evidence of more price discrimination or more market power accruing to those firms. So we interpret the combined set of results as the firms are able to expand, including to expand into new products and markets, but they don't immediately enter a new market at kind of a better markup level or a higher price point.
Thank you.
That is saying that's so what we are seeing at the industry level is that the positive impact of AI on firm level growth is concentrated in firms that are already largest and most productive. So here I'm showing you slicing based on ex-ante firm size back in 2010. And we do similar slicing based on ex-ante firm productivity. So total factor productivity and sales per worker. And the results look similar to slicing by size. I'm showing kind of log sales on the left and log employment and market share. And the firms are sliced into terciles based on their ex-ante size. It goes from lowest tercile to highest. And we see bottom tercile, there's basically no effect. On the middle tercile, the effect is smaller and not significant. And then in the top tercile of firms, that's where we're seeing the positive impact of AI on sales and employment and market share, that's less precise. So the benefits of AI are more pronounced among the firms that are already large and productive to begin with. And at the industry level, what this means is that we see increasing concentration. So if we look at the relationship between the growth in the share of AI job workers from 2010 to 2018 and the changes in industry concentration measures over the same time period, we see a positive correlation. So the industries that are seeing more AI investments are also the industries that are seeing more concentration. And this relationship is highly significant, both in OLS and IV. Our IV is at a 5-digit industry level, so we're still able to kind of do this. Both kind of top market, the market share accruing to the top firm, as well as concentration across the industry with HHI are positively related to AI investments.
So here's the question. So you have the result that your findings are strongest among the largest firms. Could it be the case that AI is actually quite expensive tool for many small and mid-sized companies? So they basically just shunned out of the market for AI professionals. They cannot afford the best ones. They cannot afford to have an expensive investment in AI.
That is a good question. So when we look at kind of the effect of AI, we, I guess, rescale within each tercile. So what we're saying is that if we look at the subsample of the smallest firms, the firms in that subsample who invest in AI more than other firms in that subsample, based on our measure, are seeing less of the benefit. Now, it is possible that if you just don't have access to quality, right, AI talent, then the firms that are hiring AI more in those terciles are just hiring more of bad AI workers. That we don't currently have a measure for, so we don't have kind of a quality measure for each employee. But that's something we're thinking about because I'm actually working on trying to assess quality of skills for a different project. So it may be worth bringing in here as well.
I think you might have already addressed this question to some extent, but small tech startups tend to be acquired by large firms when they grow to a certain stage. Could that be driving the growth skewness to large firms?
Yeah, so it did come up in terms of like, are we capturing acquisitions? And I mentioned that we don't look specifically at acquisitions, but we look at everybody who's working at a firm at a given point in time. So if a firm acquires another firm, then people who previously worked at the acquired firm right now will be working at the acquirer. So we would see an uptick in the AI workers, right, in the acquiring firm. So we would include that in the measure. We don't think that's driving the main results, just because from our careful look at the data, we don't tend to see a lot of jumps in AI investment, right? So I think if the AI human capital is coming all from an acquisition, then that would be a single year and we would see a large jump. When we were doing the event study, we started out trying to do a classical event study where we sort of identified the point at which each firm has so-called adopted AI, and then look at the dynamics after that. And we really struggled with finding that point. So for the predominant majority of firms, AI investments tend to increase continuously, and we don't see kind of a single year where all that increase happens. So that leads us to think that it's not really buying AI human capital that is driving the main results, although of course it probably happens sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what may it be that AI is actually doing for the firms. So that question has come up by now. Is it helping in terms of the price discrimination? Is it helping make the processes more efficient? What might actually be going on? And interestingly, contrary to our priors, we actually did not find any positive or any relationships, precisely estimated zero here, between measures of productivity and investments in AI. So we look at sales per worker, we also look at revenue total factor productivity, and look at how those measures of productivity changed from 2010 to 2018 related to the changes in the share of AI workers. So we do see that the firms are growing, so sales are increasing, but as I've shown in the previous tables, employment is increasing pretty much hand in hand with sales. So if you look at sales per worker, it's not going up. So we're not seeing that AI is kind of automating away the firm's other labor force. We're not seeing that kind of making the processes themselves more efficient is just increasing in scope. The kind of second channel that we consider is market power. So a lot of AI to date has been directed at things like tailoring product offerings better to consumers, advertising, which conceivably, if you have a lot of data on your consumer and you can tailor products, maybe you can also tailor pricing and price discriminate. So that was another conceptual hypothesis, and we don't really see evidence of that either. And so we look at two measures of markups relative to cost of goods sold and total expenditures, as well as the operating profit rate, and we don't see increases, significant increases in any of these measures. So it doesn't appear to be the case that as the firm is expanding, it's contemporaneously able to charge higher markups relative to its costs. So sales are increasing, but similar to employment, cost of goods sold, the total expenses, basically, any of the costs are increasing pretty much hand in hand with the increase in sales. So what we're left is that we think our results are most consistent with AI conferring scale advantages to the firms that are already large and productive without necessarily increasing the measures of measured productivity of those firms. The reason this might be going on is that AI relies on big data, and data is a byproduct of operations. The firms that are already larger have more data to be able to leverage AI technologies. Like JP Morgan has a lot more information on to estimate customer default than a small local bank would. We think our results are consistent with some of the theoretical arguments that have been proposed that technology can reduce the overhead costs of being able to span multiple markets or products, which would then allow the firms that are most efficient within each market to expand into new markets. So we test this further by looking at measures of firm or product spread. Take a look at the geographic spread of the firms, the number of counties in which the firm has a non-negligible percentage of job postings, and we see that that increases with AI investments. So the firms that have more AI workers are also posting jobs in more different regions. And we look at the number as well as percentage of employees, showing the results for the number of product managers of the firm. So with the job postings, we're able to classify which job postings are product related, and we see that those increase faster than other jobs. So those are especially complementary to AI if AI is enabling the firm to produce more products and expand into new markets. And so kind of our combined set of results, I think, point to the firms leveraging these technologies to increase their scope to potentially enter new markets. We see that in the case studies as well, but without any grabs in market power in terms of price discrimination, and without, at least in the relatively short term, right, we're looking over just a decade, without any labor displacement or increased productivity measures such as sales per worker. Any new questions at this point?
Not that I see in this chat. Thank you.
All right. In that case, I can conclude and then see if there are any broader questions at the end. So what we're finding is that artificial intelligence does have effects already. It's contributing to growth at the firm level. And that effect concentrates among firms that are already relatively large. The larger firms are more likely to or invest in AI more, and those firms then grow even larger, capturing more market share. We do not find any significant impact on productivity or markups, though of course I should caveat that it's still relatively early on, and we may see those effects further out. One interesting thing that we did do for productivity is we leveraged our kind of 8-year time horizon to look at the relationship between AI investments relatively early in that sample, so from 2010 to 2014, and what are the firms that were already hiring AI capital in those early years, whether those firms saw more productivity increases up to 2018. And interestingly, the answer is no. So we're not seeing even the firms that adopted AI and started investing in AI relatively early, even for those firms, we're not seeing displacement of labor or increases in productivity measures. What we are seeing, my slide connection is all broken again, is that at the industry level, there's the shift towards the firms that were already large and productive. And of course, that means that at the industry level, we're seeing increases in concentration. However, speaking a little bit to kind of the debate on causes and interpretations of increased industry concentration, this is not necessarily a bad thing. So we're not seeing the firms investing in AI gaining market power. So the increase in concentration is not accompanied by higher markups. Instead, it's just a reallocation or increased allocation to the firms that are already most productive. So taken together, these results underscore that technology has a role in shaping industry concentration, specifically by facilitating the rise of these productive, large, so-called superstar firms, which not necessarily an inefficient outcome.
Thank you very much. There's one question which is probably kind of related to the previous question. So could the results be to some extent driven by the demand and supply for AI in the labor market? When supply is low, small firms would not be able to hire AI workers as such. So to some extent, the result that you're seeing that, the rise of superstar firms is just because there is not enough good computer scientists who can do AI work.
Yeah, that is a great question that I think we'll have to, I guess, wait for a longer time series to be able to test, right? So I think the prediction would be that that as AI talent increases, right, which likely happens with a lag in terms of the training at undergraduate or other levels, that as the AI talent pool increases, the smaller firms are going to be able to benefit more from the investments that they make in AI. As well. Yeah, I would be curious to see whether that's the case.
All right. So I think that's all we have for questions today. Let's thank Anastasia for a really wonderful presentation today. It was really good, interesting stuff, and definitely on the frontier of financial research. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for all the questions. And remember to join us next week. We're going to have Andres Simonov from Michigan State University, who is going to talk about target date funds. But again, today, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks, Anastasia, for this great presentation.
Thank you, everyone.